Hey everybody, Andrew Kordek, back with another episode of Email Never Sleeps. And my guest again is Caroe. And we got into talking about personalization and hyper-personalization in our last iteration. And we heard a lot of feedback. Basically people wanted to know, and inquiring minds wanted to know, like, hey, how do I get started in it? Right? We defined it. So I guess I would call this episode, how to successfully implement it. How do we successfully implement hyper personalization? How do we do it at the small, medium, and large size organization? So I want to lean on your expertise, Per, and kind of maybe fire the question over to you to say, how do people do this? Where do they start? Right? Because that's
Sure.
usually the hardest part.
Yeah, and Andrew, thanks for having me on again. I appreciate it. It was so much fun. The conversation actually precipitated conversations with my wife over dinner. Like, I was like, "What do you think about, like, as a consumer?" Because
Yeah.
my wife's a graphic designer, right? So she's not in our space. She's just had to listen to me natter on about it for the last 20 years.
Yeah.
I was like, where do you feel? And she kind of made a really good point where she said, I think it depends on who I'm buying from, right? If I'm buying from Amazon,
Mm-hmm.
they know more about me than my, lady doctor.
Right.
But if
Right.
I if I'm
Right.
going to a pizza place,
Mhm.
they don't need to do. So I think what we need to define a little bit is what is personalization, what is hyper personalization for the small, medium, and large, as you said. So I mean, if you're Amazon,
Mhm.
then
Right.
then yeah, sure, everything. I bought a toilet 2 years ago.
Mhm.
That toilet's going to last 15 years, and then
Right.
13 years are going to hit me with another offer, right?
Right.
That's fine. That's within
Right.
the realm of not being too creepy. But
Right.
and you and I discussed that creepy factor. But if
Yeah.
I'm a small restaurant, franchise restaurant,
Right.
hyper personalization is going to be, do I know what team you go for? And
Mhm.
do I know what kind of food stuff you are going to be concerned about? Like,
Right.
are you plant-based, which I mentioned last time? Or
Mhm.
do you not like pickles, right? Like, there are things you can get into there. But if we talk about where to get started, think of the simplest differentiators. I
Mhm.
made the joke about being tall and getting women's sale and women's sweaters.
Yeah.
The reality is like, what is the gender of clothing I am buying? What
Right.
is the style of items that I am buying? If we
Mhm.
talk about casinos to me are really interesting. I did a thing with the old Lyris, may they
Yeah.
rest
Yeah.
in peace,
Yeah.
where we were working with a casino in Vegas. It was one of the smaller boys, but they actually run the casinos like five different businesses, or I think it was 14 different groups within it. And within each one of those groups, so you think about like the crystal bar and
Mhm.
the baccarat table and
Yeah.
the VIP lounge and the, like, all those little areas are kind of their own deal. So when you hit a casino,
Mhm.
what they were finding was a high roller would hit the casino and that would trigger an email from everybody,
Yeah.
right? Like,
Right.
the all you can eat buffet is hitting them, and like,
Mhm.
come on into the VIP restaurant where we
Yeah.
throw a lobster the size of a baby child, right?
Mhm.
And then all of this stuff would hit them, and it would just be overwhelming, and they just go,
Mhm.
well, this is not useful, right? So
Mhm.
when we talk about personalization there,
Mhm.
one, the casino's got to understand, like, high roller, medium roller, uh,
Mhm.
low rent. Like, I'm sure they've got much better terms than this.
Yeah.
Like,
Right.
hiker, and my category, which is dude who stands next to his wife and takes her drinks while she gambles, and I hold the
Right.
purse, right?
Right.
So there's different categories, and so each one of those are going to be very different messaging. So
Mhm.
that's where you get into personalization.
Mhm.
Hyper personalization is, I know that this high roller likes to gamble between 10 o'clock at night and
Mhm.
o'clock in the morning. So
Yep.
I'm make a reservation for them at a high roller table, and I'm going to see if I can get 3 or 4 other people that are like them to be at the same. Like that's hyper personalization.
Right.
That's something that's going to be super useful. So to get there,
Yep.
let's take a step back on each one of those things. One,
Mm-hmm.
how do we define our terms? Second is, what is our database sharing and knowing
Yeah.
about the individual? What have
Right.
we asked them, or what have we observed? And
Mm-hmm.
those are two really important things I mentioned before about having a preference page. If you set up a preference page, people will tell you things about them. Or in the high rollers case, their assistants will tell you things about them that they want to know. They
Yep.
only want to drink matcha tea,
Right.
right?
Right.
They only want to drink some exotic cocktail.
Mm-hmm.
That's information that's been told to you. That's information, or you've observed it. They only make a notation every time Mr. Z comes in. He only
Mm-hmm.
gets this Russian vodka that's
Right.
small batch, right?
Right.
And so we make sure to have a couple bottles of that in
Yep.
storage. Mr. Z's scheduled to come in. Let's make sure to pull those out and have them available, right? Those are
Mm-hmm.
all steps that have to happen through the technology chain to
Mm-hmm.
have an extraordinary experience for Mr. Z when he shows up to
Mm-hmm.
the high roller table.
Yep. Yep.
Um, and so we can kind of expand that across a franchise, a small, um, hamburger company
Mm-hmm.
who has 150, 200 franchise owned by 90 people, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you go down to that level, and it's, this person only seems to show up on Friday and Saturday night. That's kind of their
Yep.
cheat night where they get to go have a hamburger at Culver's. They'll use
Right.
Sage Flow line.
Yeah.
And that we're not going to hit them on Tuesday and Wednesday and Monday for those offers, because it's not going to work. That's hyper personalization, right? That's getting beyond. I know that they like this football team, so I'm going to use those colors. Or I know that they're plant based. I keep harping on that because I think it's important. Or allergens, right? The food space. I think allergens is going to be one of those things. I notice it. I don't have any allergies, but I notice when I travel, I noticed it really 7 years ago when I was in South Africa. South Africa actually has a law that all menus have to have allergens on the menu.
Interesting.
And it was such a subtle thing. And I just kind of was like, okay, I live in California where we have not met a regulation we don't like. And I'm shocked that it's not a regulation in California. I don't see it. But if it's nuts, right? Which will kill people. I have a very good friend whose daughter, if she's one peanut away from dying. It's a no joke thing. But then you have other people where it's religious. They don't eat pork, or they don't eat beef, or those are the sort of things that you can ask and observe. And if you observe, you put into the database, and then get back into your database and how you're sorting that information, how you're storing that information. Is it sitting in some big data lake? And does it then go back into the email system so that it's constantly dynamic? Or does it just live in the email system, but you're not storing it externally, right? That's a big problem that a lot of companies have had, is what is the final arbiter of information? And what is the final word?
Yeah.
Because we're not constants. We're entities in change. One of my best friends is suddenly gluten intolerant, and it was one of those things that he hit 53, and one day he had bread, and it was 5 days in a row he had bread that he went, "Oop, gotta go." And he was like, okay, maybe there's a correlation between gotta go bread. And then he started testing it, and then he went into a doctor and got tested, and sure enough, he's gluten intolerant now. Right. So these things happen, and we need to be aware of it and keep that information up to date.
You bring up a couple points that gets me thinking a little bit. And I think if I'm a small business owner, right, hyper personalization, obviously we talk about it being an email, but I think whether you're small, medium, or large, you have to take into consideration that this is not a race. This is something that's going to take time, right? Hyper personalization can start even at the greeting. If I'm a restaurant or an oil change place and I'm an individual business owner, the mere fact that they recognize me by my name is personalization or hyper personalization.
That's
It can take,
baseline personalization, right?
right?
That's old school Mr. So and so.
Yeah. Or hey, welcome back. Nice to see you again. They may not recognize my name with my face, but they know who I am. I remember when I traveled a ton early in my career, I used to go to the same hotel every single week.
Yeah.
And it was in Minneapolis, and I would walk in and they would recognize me. I guess I'm pretty recognizable with my head, but in any event, they're like, hey, Mr. Kordek, same breakfast tomorrow, right? And so they would have me of what I ordered that previous time I was there. Yep, same breakfast, same time, whatever. Took care of it. But when we start talking about small and medium-sized businesses, every little thing helps, right? And I know it seems kind of trivial to say, well, maybe we should enter in that my wife is gluten intolerant. She has celiac, right? That if we go in and regularly go into this restaurant, they should kind of know that when we sit down or when we make a reservation, because they can correlate specific names to that. So it's not a race. It's sort of getting there and inputting that. And right, does it come and go into the email program or to an SMS program, right, where they can get pretty personalized to my needs? Then larger scale organizations have a bigger problem, right? They have these data lakes or CDPs or whatever we want to call it these days, and they can append a lot of demographic information. But boy, oh boy, that demographic information better be right. But it should be my interactions. And everyone uses the Amazon cases as an example. I'll use another example. I got a text today from New Balance here in my local area in the suburb of Chicago. They know I bought my New Balances a year ago. And they're like, hey, dude, it's time to kind of do this, right? Here's your thing. You probably have already worn down your shoes to the nubs. But that's the kind of the little stuff. And so when people set these expectations around hyper personalization, what I find very interesting is that they have this enormous thing of, we need to know everything so we could quote unquote hyper personalize. And I'm like, no. Take it in baby steps. Do the certain things. Make sure that it works, right? That you can do it. So get that little tidbit of information. The customer wants you to feel as if you know them, but not over know them, right? And we talked about, the whole creepy factor last time, right? But every little bit helps. So how do we start? I think you start with, what is the most important pieces of data you can collect or obtain or interact with going forward for your customers. And then they're willing to probably give you more signals, more information, whether it's at a preference center level, which is a whole separate conversation for me, or whether it's just through my interactions, with them. And guess what, everybody, I don't care if you're small or medium or large, hyper personalization may not work. And I say that very loosely because there's no long-term case studies that I've ever seen that says it works long-term 20% year over year. And you're like, whoa, wait a minute, right? So this is where I think we tend to, when in this age of GPT and all this kind of stuff and the instantaneous amount of information we can get, this is where I caution people to really sort of take their time and get that data, especially if you want them to be a long-term customer of whatever it is you're selling.
Yeah, I mean, I'll repeat from my touchstone word from last episode was iterative.
Mm-hmm.
I think these things need to be iterative. It's funny, as you were saying that, I was thinking of I'll go back to preference setter. A preference setter I saw that was like small, medium, large, and the small was, what's your name? What's your gender preference? What's your, like, really kind of high level things, like he, him, he, her pronouns do matter to a lot of people, and it's also a hot issue for other people, right? But let's just kind of take a stance to say, if I want to be called a certain preference because I have a child who's trans, that it's important for her, right? So I make an effort for it, right? So if you have that in the system, and so I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but you
Hmm.
have some basic questions. Who do I
Hmm.
identify as? What's my name? Do I have any, like, we'll go to restaurants. Do I have any allergens?
Yep.
Or, and I'll even take it to another level, because my wife has, we did the 23andMe deal, and part of it is they'll say, do you have the gene where cilantro tastes like soap? And my
Oh. Hmm.
wife does. And
Oh,
it's funny, we were having dinner one time and we were talking about it, and the kids were
yeah.
there. And two out of the three kids went, "Oh my God, that's what cilantro tastes like." So like
Whoa.
it suddenly like hit, like they're like,
Yeah, yeah,
cilantro's kind of gross and I don't
yeah,
like it. And the
yeah,
other was like, what the hell are you talking about? Cilantro tastes fine.
yeah,
You
yeah,
know,
yeah.
it's clear that from a genetic level, the something as simple as cilantro. Right? Well,
Right.
cilantro is in a lot of stuff. A
Yep.
lot of Mediterranean cuisines utilize it.
Yeah.
Lots of
Yeah.
East Asian cuisines utilize it.
Yeah.
Uh, the other one's garlic, which is a weird one.
Yeah.
But,
Totally.
I know a number of people who are allergic to garlic, right?
Yeah.
So, and then other people who simply, it just gives them an upset stomach. So maybe that's a minor allergy. Those are kind of simple things to ask.
Right. Right.
But then you get into more, then you get into the deeper levels of
Hmm.
when do you prefer to go out to eat? Those you just have to try and keep an
Hmm.
eye on. And this is about, where do I start? Well, to start, have a good database. Make sure it's up to date.
Yeah.
Through,
Yep.
we want to get to here.
Right.
We start here, and then we go to
Right.
here, we go to here, to here, to here, to here. And
Right.
I'll volunteer both of us. Give us a call, because this is the kind of stuff that I
Yeah.
enjoy. I think that's coming hopefully through in the
Yeah.
conversation. It's stuff I enjoy, and I'll talk to people about it because it's just fun for me to do. So
Yeah.
let me know. My contact information is very readable. But thinking through that process is, first, where do we store the data?
Yeah.
Second, how do we want to communicate with them?
Yep.
Third, what is the frequency of communication?
Hmm.
Fourth, we start getting into implementation of communication. So
Right.
um, I think those are steps that are often missed.
Hmm.
People kind of quickly gather names. I'm involved with a nonprofit I'm on the board of, and
Hmm.
when I came on board, I was like, great, where's our database for our donor base? Like, who are the
Right.
people who are donating money to us? And I got a name of 25 people, and two of them were my relations, and one was dead. So I was like, okay,
Yeah.
this is a trap list. This is
Yeah.
not a useful
Right.
list.
But
So,
but you make but
sorry.
you make a valid point, right? So just we talk about the use of data and the value of updating and importing data. And if I'm a business owner, or I'm a medium or large scale business, it's it's all about continuously updating it. It's always about making sure that you could use it and take baby steps to do it. So when we start talking about the word implement, which is a really sort of large word, right? Like, let's go through an
Yeah,
implementation. Well, I can tell you for one thing, implementing anything is never easy or fun, right? Like, I don't see people
right,
jumping at the opportunity to go, let's implement. So when we start talking about how do we implement hyper personalization email, is it starts at some point in time, and you
right.
need to at least start doing it and not strive for perfection. Like you said, iterative, right? Start small, move up, because it may or may not work.
Right.
And I think that's the most important. And I don't care if you're, again, selling burgers or socks or oil changes or dry cleaning, in the franchise level or at the casino level, right? Where they're into, other than just gambling, their shows and other perks that
Restaurants,
you
man,
get,
they make a
right?
lot of money on restaurants.
Absolutely, right. So what's your final thought here, on implementing? Have you made everything you think, or if you had to bubble it up into one specific thing?
Honestly, I'm going to go a completely different direction, and I'm going
Okay.
to say, get people in the room who do not look like you.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, and I say that with all due respect, but I've
Mm-hmm.
sat in a bunch of rooms with a bunch of middle-aged white dudes, and we're all like, yeah, this is important. It's like, you bring in a couple of Asian voices, you bring in a couple of female voices, you bring in a couple of poor voices, like a
Mhm.
bunch of middle-aged, white, college-educated guys
Mhm.
aren't America, right? So you bring in other people and go, hey, like, what do we think about? Uh, we want to get to here. What are the steps that we have to take? And
Mhm.
it may you may everyone may agree with one another anyway because of
Mhm.
corporate culture. You just may end up with somebody who raises their hand and goes, you know what's really resonates in my community
Mhm.
is X, Y, and Z. And we'll
Mhm.
look around the table at each other going, really? That's the thing? Like, oh yeah,
Mhm.
that's like a really
Right.
big thing with us.
Right. Right.
And it's like,
Right.
oh, okay,
Yeah.
we haven't thought of that, right? So
Yeah.
any of these projects, bring in a bunch of different people,
Bring in your customers,
bring
bring
in,
in
my
a
God,
swath of your
hey.
customers that represent people that are either high value customers and customers that you think or can become high value to get their opinions on
Yeah,
what matters
absolutely. That's
most to
exciting.
them. Not what matters. I mean, what matters most to you is important, right? I understand that. But oftentimes we get surprised,
Yeah.
right? And you've been in testing before. Oftentimes we get surprised. We're like, they're going to choose blue, right? And then they're ending up choosing yellow. And you're like, whoa, wait a minute. Why do they choose yellow? Well, guess
Yeah.
what? The customers are in charge, right? And so you can get a lot of insight to that. So that's a great point into how to start to implement. The one final thought that I would have is, yeah, it's kind of scary. Yeah, it's kind of daunting, but it's not. If you start really, really small, and even if you try to do hyper personalized to a level of information that you have on them, test it to the non personalized over a period of time, and then learn through your learnings, iterative innovation, right, around how certain things should perform better than others. And guess what? That's the only way you're going to learn whether or not it works or not. And I think that's important. So
Yeah.
hopefully we've sort of answered the bugs that people wanted, or at least bits and pieces. Certainly comment on this if you want more. I'm happy to bring Per back on. He's a wonderful resource. All of his deets again will be in this vidcast or video or podcast or however people or whatever they're calling it.
Whatever the kids are calling it these
What
days.
are the kids calling it? Right? It's not a TikTok thing. It's something else. So hopefully this adds the value. And thank you again, Per.
And
Your
thanks so much, man.
information and
Love, always
experience,
fun to talk to you.
yeah, it's invaluable. And so I really appreciate it. So everybody, until next time, thank you and keep on emailing the right way.